Hi, my name is Terry Kim and I am a co-CEO of Republica, a South Korea-based global music distribution company. Today, I am going to tell you a little bit about the South Korean music market. There will be some interesting facts and information that you should know about the South Korean market, which I think is one of the most dynamic music markets in the world. First, let's look at the size of the market. According to the IFPI data, the International Federation of the Phonographic Industry, South Korea is the sixth largest music market in the world. Number one is the United States, of course, followed by Japan, the UK, Germany, and France. And South Korea is the sixth largest in the world, with a size of almost 900 million US dollars. The seventh largest market is China, with a size of almost 800 million US dollars. Many of you should be surprised that South Korea, a small country in the Far East, is the sixth largest music market in the world. When did this market become so big? Well, it had been this big for many years. In 2016, South Korea became the eighth largest music market. And in 2017, it became the sixth largest, surpassing Canada and Australia, and has stayed there ever since. And in 2019, China became so big that the difference in market share between Korea and China was only 0.1 percentage points. Many people had thought that China would become the sixth largest market in 2020. Even I thought it was inevitable that China would surpass Korea. However, amidst the COVID-19 pandemic, South Korea has shown tremendous growth and kept the sixth place. Not only that, but the market share of South Korea has increased from 3% to 4%. Let's look at the growth rate of each country. In 2020, the global music industry showed a growth rate of 7.4%. This is huge growth, considering that the world economy has suffered from the COVID-19 pandemic. Some countries have shown a negative growth, such as Japan and France. However, China has shown a growth rate of 33.6%, which is an incredible number. But South Korea has shown a more significant growth rate of 44.8%, which is unbelievable. How is this possible? I will come back to this later. Now, let's look at the breakdown of revenues of each country by format. We will compare the Korean market with the global market, the US market, and the Chinese market. The revenue comes from 5 different sources: streaming, downloads, physical, performance rights, and synchronization. If you look at the global market data, streaming makes up the most significant part of the total revenue with 62%. In the US, streaming is 72%, and in China, it is more than 90% of the total revenue. However, in South Korea, streaming is only about 48% of the total revenue. Why? It is because physical sales are so big. In South Korea, physical sales are 46% of the total revenue, which is almost as big as streaming, which is a very rare case in other countries. Now, let's dig into the physical market. The physical market is made up of CDs, vinyl, and music videos. In the US, vinyl is bigger than CD sales. But in Korea, the physical market is the CD market. CD makes up 97% of the physical market. Has the physical market always been this big? The physical market was big also in 2019, but not as this big. In 2019, the physical sales in Korea were 220 million US dollars. But then, in 2020, amidst the COVID-19 pandemic, the physical sales recorded more than 400 US dollars, showing a growth rate of 86%. A growth rate of 86%? This is an incredible number considering everything is shifting towards digital streaming services. This chart shows the total number of physical albums released in South Korea from 2012 to 2020. When it says physical albums, I am sure it includes not only the albums, but also the singles and the EPs. From looking at this chart, you can see that the growth of physical sales is more of a recent event. The total number of releases grew from 25 million in 2019 to 41 million in 2020. This is unbelievable, but let's try to find out the reason behind this incredible number. First, it is the fandom. In Korea, many of those who purchase CDs are fans of so-called K-pop idol groups. Many fans purchase CDs even if they don't have a CD player. It is like a collection or a souvenir. Sometimes the label releases two different CDs with the same track album because the fans would buy them as collections. If you looked at the top 10 best-selling albums in 2020, you could see that they're all from the K-pop idol groups with a large fan base. BTS, 17, NCT, Blackpink, and EXO all have a large fan base. And as the fandom grew in 2020, so did the physical sales. Second, it is the COVID-19. This chart compares the number of physical albums released versus the number of concert attendees in South Korea. You can see the number of concert attendees plummeted in 2020, whereas the number of physical sales soared in the same year. Fans spend a lot of money attending concerts of their favorite stars. They even travel around the world just to attend one concert. But because there weren't many concerts to attend in 2020 due to the pandemic, the fans had more money to spend on collections, which they did. To some of you, this may sound like irony, even far-fetched, but this is not my interpretation. Many analysts and market experts see it this way. Lastly, and maybe the most significant reason, is the global phenomenon of K-pop. If you compare the number of physical albums released in 2019 and 2020, the domestic release has not increased much, whereas the export has increased more than 150%. So the global phenomenon of K-pop, which brought the increase in export sales, could be the best explanation for the growth of the physical market. In 2015, there was EXO, and maybe only EXO, but in 2020, there's EXO, BTS, NCT, Blackpink, 17, and many more, which led to a global phenomenon of K-pop. I am sure in the US and in Europe, more listeners listened to K-pop in 2020 than in 2019, but those listeners are not living in Korea. They are listening to K-pop from the US and Europe. So those streaming revenues are not counted in the Korean music market according to the IFPI data. However, CD export revenues are included in the physical sales. Therefore, you can say that the K-pop phenomenon increased the physical sales, but had not much impact on the streaming numbers because the streaming number is only domestic, whereas the physical sales come from both domestic and export sales. There you have it, the three reasons behind the incredible growth rate of the Korean physical market. Speaking of K-pop, let's find out more about K-pop fans. If you look at the number of K-pop YouTube views by country, you can see that South Korea has the most number of views among different countries. This is quite obvious because K-pop is Korean pop that appeals to Korean listeners. However, you can see from this chart that Indonesia has about the same number of views as South Korea. The third place is Thailand, followed by Vietnam and United States. Japan is in sixth place, followed by the Philippines, Brazil, Mexico, and Malaysia. Many of you are wondering why China isn't in the top 10. I think it is because it is the YouTube data. If you have a different data source, I am confident China would be in the top 10. Now let's take a look at the YouTube views of some of the most popular K-pop idol groups. 17 has more fan base in Japan than in Korea, according to this data. Also a big fan base in Indonesia and the Philippines. For Blackpink, South Korea is not even in the top 5. Indonesia has the most significant number of views, followed by the Philippines, Thailand, Brazil, and Vietnam. South Korea is in 10th place. And finally, the BTS, which has the most significant fan base in Japan, followed by Indonesia, India, the United States, and Mexico. South Korea is in 7th place. Now, let me share some interesting results from a national survey done by the Korea Creative Content Agency in 2020. Korea Creative Content Agency asked 3,000 Korean people in August and September of 2020. They had been doing this survey for many years now, and this survey is one of the most widely used surveys in the Korean music industry. They asked 3,000 people, music from which countries do you enjoy listening to? When people were asked to pick only one country, 84% chose Korean music. Only 12% chose music from English-speaking countries. However, when people were asked to pick two countries, 95% chose Korean music and 74% chose music from English-speaking countries. Only about 6% chose J-pop, and the others were all less than 2%. This implies if you are a non-Korean artist and want your music heard in Korea, please sing in English. Otherwise, you won't have many fans in Korea. Next question. Which genre of music do you enjoy listening to? They asked the same question in 2018, 2019, and also in 2020. And the number one answer has always been ballad. So what is a ballad? A Korean ballad, or a K-ballad, is a sentimental song with sad ending lyrics that became a mainstream genre in Korea in the 80s. If you're looking for US songs in the 80s with a similar style, they would be Hello by Lionel Richie or Open Arms by Journey. To understand what a Korean ballad is, I think it is best to listen to the music itself. Let's listen to From Friend to Friend by Oh Se-eum, which is a typical Korean ballad. You can tell that this song has a sad ending just by looking at its title, From Friend to Friend. If the title had been From Friend to Lover or From Friend to Fiancé, the song would have had a much happier ending. Let's listen to the song.
항상 입술 끝에 맺혀 전하지 못했던 사랑한다고 수없이 외쳤던 그 말 널 생각하면 나는 미칠 것 같아 너와 함께 했던 우리 시간들 이젠 다신 없을까봐 용기를 못 내 지금 네가 예뻐서 아무 일 없던 것처럼 다시.
In 6th place is a genre called trot. So what is a trot? The trot is a genre of Korean popular music known for its use of repetitive rhythm, vocal inflections, and straightforward lyrics. Some people say Korean trot originated from Japanese enka because trot first appeared in Korea during the Japanese colonial rule, and trot and enka have similar styles of singing. You can see from the chart that trot gained its popularity in 2020. This is due to the large success of the TV audition program called Miss Trot in 2019 and Mr. Trot in 2020. Just like K-ballad, to understand what trot is, it is best to listen to the music itself. This is a song called 100% by Park Se-wook, who is the winner of another TV audition program called Voice Trot. 100% by Park Se-wook.
100%를 잘 하다가도 10%를 못했어 1%가 되기도 했었지 그러나 이제는 달라 흔들리지 않아 언제나 우리 사랑 100%야 오늘도 믿고 사랑하니까 우리 사랑 100%.
Now, let's compare the results between males and females, and also among people in different age groups. As you can see, the ballad is the #1 choice in all age groups, except for the preteens, who pick the dance genre as their #1 choice. If you compare hip-hop and trot, people under 40 prefer hip-hop to trot, whereas people in their 50s prefer trot over hip-hop. And people in their 40s equally like hip-hop and trot. Now, let's take a look at the streaming services of Korea. 3,000 people were asked to pick one streaming service they use mainly. The largest streaming service in Korea is not Spotify, not Apple Music, but a local platform called Melon. Melon has lost its market share over the years, but is still the dominating service in Korea. Number 2 is YouTube, followed by Genie, Flow, and Vibe. Apple Music has only 1% market share. You can tell that the Korean market is dominated by local players. And among global players, only YouTube has a significant market share. However, it is a totally different story when you ask people to pick not only the major one, but all the streaming services they subscribe to. Traditionally, it had always been Melon. However, in 2020, YouTube has shown tremendous growth and took the #1 place. How do you explain this? There could be many reasons. One of the reasons is that YouTube carries many more songs than the local Korean players. Local Korean players focus on K-pop artists and major global artists and do not have many songs from global indie artists. Another reason is that the local Korean players are all alike with similar features. So if you already subscribe to a local Korean service and you want to have a second one, there is no reason to subscribe to another local service. It is better to have a YouTube service because it has more songs, more music videos, and more content to watch. Lastly, people were asked if they listen to more music due to COVID-19. And it seems that people listen to music more than before because of COVID-19. And there you have it, some interesting facts about the Korean music market. I hope it helped you better understand the Korean market. Now, let me summarize the key takeaways. 1. Korea is the 6th largest music market in the world. 2. Korea is one of the fastest growing markets in the global music industry. 3. The biggest reason for the recent growth is the global success of K-pop and its fandom. 4. COVID-19 has not stopped the Korean market from growing. 5. Korean music is very influential in other Asian countries. 6. So if you're big in Korea, you can be big in the other Asian countries. 7. But the Korean streaming service is still dominated by the local players. 8. So if you want your music heard in Korea, you have to have them on the local platforms, maybe through a local distribution company. 9. If you are a non-Korean artist and want your music heard in Korea, English can be the best choice of language. 10. Korean market is constantly changing, so please be prepared for the new trend. Lastly, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I spent the first decade of my career as a journalist and then a consultant. Then I worked another 10 years for the Korean companies, 5 years as an executive director. And in 2018, I co-founded a global music distribution company called Republica. You can always connect with me on LinkedIn and send me a message. Thank you very much.